Welcome to Fun and Games Side Quests. Every episode is a different host sharing a video game they love and why they love it.
Good morning, or afternoon, or evening, drive time, commute, what have you. It's me, Mayor Howard Vander, and for once, I am not coming to you with a brand new episode of the sensational smash hit podcast, The Vander Jam, though you can still find me living over on Twitter at Vander_I am. Instead, I decided to take advantage of a prompt and give a couple thoughts on a game that is quite near and dear to my own heart, one from recent years. That is the 2017, maybe gonna go ahead and call it a masterpiece. We're talking about Yoko Taro's incredibly singular NieR Automata. As a 35-year-old man, it is safe to say that I have played a lot of video games in my day. I was an early draftee in the console wars, and thankfully I was 4F for the next round of console wars. All that to say is anybody who plays video games at this age has seen a little bit of, well, almost everything. So the idea of a game that can actually engage with you at the level of concept and offer something new becomes very valuable indeed, especially in an accelerated media landscape. And if you look at director Yoko Taro's other work, most notably the Drakengard franchise, you'll notice a theme that maybe it doesn't quite hit the review heights that AAA releases do, but generally there is something fascinating happening in the game that few other directors or designers ever aim to do. NieR Automata is probably the best balance between using those concepts and also using them within the framework of a game that's actually fun to play. So the obvious points, it looks great, it has a fantastic score, and when you're getting the team at PlatinumGames to revamp the combat for you, you're already on the road to success. But what sets NieR Automata apart is the lore, the world building, and the story. With the recent anniversary of Spec Ops: The Line, discourse has turned to the idea of games that make us recognize our own complicity in the characters' actions, and the relationship between our own choices and what characters do in-game. And in the case of Spec Ops: The Line, it is impossible to miss the overall theme that war truly is hell, whatever side you're fighting on. Now, NieR Automata takes those concepts and it amplifies them. So how does it do it? Well, it presents us with a war-torn, ruined Earth in the future, where the overall survival of humanity hinges on the outcome of a war between androids, aka the YoRHa units, created by the last gasps of humanity in their eternal and unending war against machines created by aliens from another planet. Now, the game proceeds, more or less as you would think, following 9S, 2B, and eventually 2A. Obviously, I'm going to spoil a lot of things here. But what starts out very quickly in genre territory very quickly becomes inverted. For instance, what would normally be a late game spoiler in other titles is actually very early on in this one, as we realize that the aliens who created the machines that we're at war with, they're long gone. In fact, they were actually killed by the very machines that they created once they realized that they didn't need a master anymore. And then we're sort of left with the question of, okay, well, if our enemy is gone, do we need to keep fighting the enemy? And as synthetic beings, the main characters of 2B and 9S are constantly forced to grapple with the question of, you're programmed for a function, what happens if you no longer have that function? Is it better to actually make yourself analogous and then declare war on something new? Or, much like in our own lives, do we brave the sheer horror that is a wide open field of possibilities and the chance of failure in front of you? Now, granted, it's spooled out nicely, assisted by one of, I think, the best character dynamics in games, and that's the budding friendship/possible relationship between 9S and 2B, which, again, is in the backdrop of a game where they are fighting for humanity and yet actively trying to resist emotions, irrationality, the things that define humans as human. If the work of Stan Brakhage, or the avant-garde short film The Way Things Go Teach Us Anything, said there's a great deal of sentiment and emotion generated by inorganic beings, and we see it here on full display. Now I know what you're probably thinking. Mr. Mayor, we have that. It's called Portal and Portal 2. Well, hang on, I'm getting there. Because the other thing that becomes apparent with NieR Automata is that it really does resist being shunted in any kind of category. So, on the surface, it very much is your straightforward Devil May Cry, Bayonetta type slash thriller. Only then on the second playthrough, you suddenly change perspectives, play as a whole other character, get a different narrative, a different view on the same events, which provides new details that cause us to reread what we have seen before with a greater understanding. And it also kind of turns into a shooting game. You really do have to see for yourself because it's one of those things that on paper should not work at all. And yet it works so effortlessly well in this case that it's frankly surprising more people don't try and do that sooner. But back to the idea of narrativity. Because it's one thing to have some interesting concepts within your game's narrative. It's another to look at narrativity itself, and even more than the Emil skull mask that director Yoko Taro is known for wearing. I would say it's that approach to narrativity that really defines his games, because we live in an era of DLC, expanded universes, prequels, sequels, interquels, all that other stuff. Well, this is a game that once it's over, encourages you to play again. And when you start noticing differences, you think, oh, hey, we're going to get more of the story. I'm totally on board. And that actually carries you through the fact that you're largely repeating the same gameplay loop. But in a break from the long gaming tradition of 100% completion and Easter eggs to unlock the golden ending, what we see here is actually the opposite, where the longer the story goes and the more details provided, the more we realize that the victories we think we win in the first playthrough are ultimately hollow. And anecdotally, the director has said in many interviews that a big part of his choice to make games this way is anybody who chooses to continue fighting, continue perpetuating war and violence, probably has something wrong with them, and they're probably not going to see a happy ending if they remain committed to violence. And indeed, this is a game that gives you 26 different unique endings, and most of them really can be grouped under the label of be careful what you wish for. And then one time the game ends because you think it's a good idea to let an android eat a trout to predictable results. But rather than having something as crass and tacky as the good ending or the bad one, there's an interesting relationship between playthroughs of the game because they do function as part of one larger story that only reveals itself across multiple ones. And I'm hard-pressed to think of another game that does a similar thing in quite the way that this one does. And of course, that's not to discount the amazing set pieces we get, such as fights on the back of a roller coaster, an enormous carousel robot that has begun consuming and assimilating other robots into its body in the desire to be beautiful. We have a village full of pacifist robots that seek to emulate and learn the ways of humanity, and learn concepts such as fear and self-preservation to also disastrous results. We have a hidden forest kingdom that basically tries to hold up the ideals of monarchy in the form of robots. And we also end up getting a whole bunch of reveals about whether or not the people issuing orders to us really have our best intentions in mind, or are even thinking about us at all. Indeed, there is almost a bleakness, a nihilism at the heart of NieR Automata, because so much of how it all turns out in each playthrough hinges on the theme of emptiness, absence, a sort of ruin at the heart of things, and it's very easy to misread that as nihilism. And yet, if you endure all of that nihilism, all of the unfortunates, all of the heartbreak of seeing two people you wanted to see fall in love and be happy and victorious together, recognizing that that's just simply not possible within this story, and more to the point, we see not only the deaths of these characters, but the deaths of the very institutions that they seek to uphold, and the further gut punch of realizing that maybe all of this was actually by design. We also have sequences of mercy being misread as hostility, we have futile revenge quests, we have characters that yearn to resist their programming and find themselves inevitably bound to it. And at the end of about 40 hours, all of this struggle and turmoil, we are left with most of our main characters lying dead on the ground as the final bits of life fade from their eyes and they look to the stars above. And here's where it does something fascinating. Because the end credits end up becoming a shoot 'em up in its own, where you are fighting off waves upon waves upon waves of enemies. It seems that the battle is hopeless, and then you are joined by an ally. And then you are joined by more, and all of a sudden, working together with faceless individuals, you don't need context, you don't need to know their names, you just need to know what side you're on, and that's good enough for people to group together, form coalitions amongst themselves, fight back, and ultimately turn the tide. And while the true ending of the game is not something you could easily classify as a happy ending, it is an ultimately hopeful one. Because amidst all this, we get the sense that the same cycle that brought us to ruin is about to restart, and there's a very real chance that absolutely nothing will be different. Like Mark says, history repeats itself, first as tragedy, and then as farce. But the cycle is restarted anyway, and the characters acknowledge that as long as there is the hope that things can turn out differently, and as long as we are committed to working towards making things turn out differently, there's the possibility that it will. And I don't know about you folks at home, but in these difficult and trying times where progress is slow, victories are hard to come by, the idea that hope in itself is something to strive for takes on a different import than you might think that it would. And then at the very end, the game offers you, the player, the choice. Unlike most people who hit 100% on a save file, take a picture of that, and then mount it on the wall in a plaque as a form of completion, this game asks you to do the opposite. It says, do you want to delete your save? And then you realize doing so allows you to then be one of those invisible allies helping another player reach the end of their journey. And I guess that ultimately ends up being what I see the game as being about. Teaching us that regardless of what our origin is, regardless of the circumstances that drive us into action, regardless of our nature as organic, inorganic, emotive, or non-emotive beings, at the end of the day, we all have a question that we are asked. Do we want to work for something bigger than ourselves? And with that, are we prepared to make sacrifices knowing that we may never see the benefit of it, we may never be part of that better world we're trying to create, but that someone else may? And if you're anything like me, I happily deleted my save because I want to be part of the solution. I will even settle for being part of the possibility of a solution. So many games can hit us on an emotive level. Some can even hit us on a conceptual or philosophical level. Very few games encourage us to look inward, reflect on our own selves, and think about our own humanity and the responsibility that we have in carrying that. Is NieR Automata a perfect game? No. It has flaws. It definitely shows the seams. Not all of it fits together as neatly as you would hope, and probably the directors had intended. And yet none of that bothers me, because this is a game that stumbles in the pursuit of trying to do something new, something innovative, and something with ambition. And one doesn't really need to look at the modern gaming landscape for too long to realize that there are so few people willing to take risks and willing to do something that nobody else thought to do. If that doesn't tickle your fancy, you can come and stay for the roaring action combat and the incredible soundtrack. If that doesn't float your boat, you have an amazingly affecting relationship between the central characters, despite being synthetic beings. And if you're still not convinced by that, it's a game that allows you to walk around in the sewer and beat up tiny little chubby robots with a steel pipe that you found. Okay, it's got something for everybody. As they say, better to be a diamond with a flaw than a pebble without. And NieR Automata is a flawed pebble that I continue to find myself coming back to and enjoying just as much, if not more, every single time. So yes, it's a practical inconvenience to culminate your journey by deleting all of your save data, but think about it this way. It means that there's always a reason to get back into the world of NieR Automata, to start the cycle again, and to do so in the hope and belief that maybe, just maybe, this time it's going to be better. An enormous thank you to the lovely people over at the Fun and Games podcast and to all of you at home. Happy gaming.
Hey,
Oh, hey, Jeff.
what's going on, guys?
Oh, talking about Superman.
Oh, cool. I could talk about Superman.
I could talk some more about Superman.
We know.
I'll bet a few people would want to get in on this.
I'm down.
You know it.
That sounds like fun. I'll do it.
Cool, let's do it. We can call the show Men of Steel.
And you can find it at certainpov.com.
Or wherever you get your podcasts.
Yay.
CertainPOV.com.